Last week, you were terrified. You watched silver crash 37% and you thought it was over. That's exactly what they wanted you to believe. Because while you were staring at red numbers on your screen, panicking, maybe even selling at a loss, a completely different game was being played in the shadows. A game of massive, silent accumulation. I'm about to show you something the mainstream financial media will never report. Analysis of COMEX delivery data and large position holder reports reveals that in the 72 hours immediately following the crash, a group of major financial institutions quietly took delivery of approximately 52 million ounces of physical silver. Not paper contracts, not ETFs, the actual metal. They didn't announce it. They didn't broadcast it. They just moved swiftly and decisively while everyone else was running for the exits. This wasn't retail investors buying the dip. This was coordinated, institutional accumulation at a scale we haven't seen in years. The question that should be burning in your mind right now is, what do these institutions see that you don't? In this video, I will expose their playbook. I'll reveal the 3 critical signals they're reacting to, signals that suggest silver's violent crash was just the setup for the most explosive price move in modern commodity history. And by the end, you'll understand exactly why the smartest money in the world is loading up on physical silver right now. Stay with me. This changes everything. So who are these mysterious buyers? These aren't ordinary commercial banks. These are the apex predators of the financial system. Group 1, the banking giants. First, we have the major bullion banks, institutions like JP Morgan and Bank of America. Public records and derivative position reports show these banks have dramatically increased their physical holdings in their proprietary accounts. Why would they do this? These banks have been on the short side of the silver market for years. They've sold paper silver they didn't own, betting the price would fall. But now they're covering those positions with physical metal. That tells you something critical. They know a supply shock is coming. And if they don't have the real metal when that happens, their entire position could implode. Group 2, the sovereign wealth funds. Next, we're seeing aggressive accumulation from sovereign wealth funds, the investment arms of entire nations. Entities like Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund and Norway's Government Pension Fund have been steadily rotating out of dollar-denominated assets and into real, tangible commodities. For them, this isn't speculation. This is wealth preservation. They're watching inflation destroy purchasing power, and they are moving into hard assets that can't be printed or diluted. Group 3, the macro hedge funds. Finally, we have the secretive macro hedge funds, firms like Bridgewater, Elliott Management, and others who think 5 moves ahead. These aren't momentum traders. These are geopolitical strategists who position for paradigm shifts in the global financial system. When they move aggressively into a physical commodity, they're not just betting on price, they're betting on systemic change. All of these groups, with completely different strategies and objectives, are doing the exact same thing right now, quietly loading up on physical silver. So we know who is buying. But the real question is, why? What signal are they seeing that's hidden from the rest of us? I'm going to show you the first signal in the next 3 minutes. And it comes from the darkest corner of the bond market, a place called the repo market. This is where the real crisis is brewing. This is the first signal that triggered the institutional buying frenzy. The repo market is freezing. Now, most people have never heard of the repo market, but it's the invisible plumbing that keeps the entire financial system functioning. Here's how it works. Every single night, banks lend trillions of dollars to each other to meet their reserve requirements. It's short-term lending, usually overnight, secured by treasury bonds. When this market runs smoothly, nobody notices. When it breaks, everything breaks. And right now, it's showing stress levels we haven't seen since 2008. The warning signal. In the week following the silver crash, the SOFR rate, that's the secured overnight financing rate, the benchmark for overnight lending, spiked from 0.5% to over 5%. That's a tenfold increase in the cost of overnight money. What does that mean in plain English? It means banks are afraid to lend to each other. They don't trust that they'll get their money back. This is exactly what happened in September 2008, right before Lehman Brothers collapsed. The repo market seized up because banks realized they didn't know who was holding toxic assets. When trust evaporates between banks, they stop lending to each other and start hoarding the only assets they truly trust, cash and hard commodities like gold and silver. Why this matters? The major institutions saw this spike in overnight rates and immediately understood what it meant. It's not just a technical glitch, it's a symptom of deep structural instability in the banking system. And when the plumbing starts to fail, smart money doesn't wait for the official announcement. They move into real assets that exist outside the banking system. That's signal number 1. But there's a second signal that's even more alarming. And it's not coming from the financial markets at all, it's coming from the physical world. The second signal has nothing to do with Wall Street. It has to do with ships, shipping lanes, and a quiet crisis in the global insurance market. About 90% of global trade moves by sea, and every cargo ship carrying valuable commodities needs insurance. That insurance is provided by a handful of massive underwriters, with Lloyd's of London being the most prominent. The new policy, here's what happened that almost nobody noticed. In late January, Lloyd's and several other major marine insurers issued new underwriting guidelines. They announced they would no longer provide full coverage for ships transporting strategic metals, including silver, through high-risk corridors like the Red Sea, the Strait of Hormuz, or the South China Sea. Why does this matter? Because the world's largest silver producers are in Mexico, Peru, China, and Australia. The metal has to cross these exact shipping lanes to reach refineries and end markets. Without insurance, shipping companies either refuse to transport the cargo or charge massive premiums that make the economics unworkable. The immediate effect. What this means in practical terms is that new silver supply is getting stuck at origin points. It's sitting in warehouses in Mexico City or Lima because nobody wants to risk moving it. The physical supply chain is breaking down, and the major banks know this. They're watching real-time shipping data. They see the vessels that aren't moving. They understand that the silver currently sitting in vaults might be the last easily accessible supply for months. So they're grabbing every available ounce while they still can. That's signal number 2. But the third signal is the most terrifying, and it involves something the U.S. government is quietly preparing right now. I'm about to show you a legislative framework that could change everything. This is the final piece of the puzzle. The reason these institutions are moving with such urgency isn't just about market dynamics or supply chains. It's about what the government is preparing to do. The legislative discussion. There's currently discussion in policy circles about a legislative framework tentatively called the Strategic Asset Security Act. Now, I need to be clear, this isn't passed law yet, but based on publicly available congressional committee discussions and think tank policy papers, there's a real push to give the Treasury Department expanded authority over what they're calling critical strategic commodities. The stated goal is to protect American supply chains and ensure national security. But here's the clause that has the smart money concerned. The framework being discussed would potentially authorize the Treasury Secretary, in the event of a declared national supply chain emergency, to require domestic entities to report holdings of strategic assets, and if deemed necessary, to acquire those assets in exchange for fair market compensation in US dollars. Does that sound familiar? It should. It's almost identical to Executive Order 6102 from 1933, when FDR forced Americans to surrender their gold to the government. Why silver qualifies. Here's what makes this so relevant. Silver is now officially classified as a critical mineral by the U.S. Geological Survey. It's essential for defense systems, solar panels, electric vehicles, and advanced electronics. If there's a genuine supply shortage, which the insurance crisis is already creating, the government could theoretically invoke emergency powers. What the banks see, the major institutions, are watching these legislative discussions very carefully. They understand that if this framework passes, private ownership of large quantities of physical silver could become complicated, restricted, or even subject to forced sale. So they're positioning now before any such regulations take effect. They want their metal secured in vaults under their control before the rules change. That's signal number 3. Now let me connect all 3 of these signals and show you what they're actually preparing for. Now we can see the complete picture. Let me connect the dots. The repo market is freezing. The banking system's internal plumbing is failing. Trust between major institutions is collapsing. The physical supply chain is breaking. New silver CA can't reach the market because insurance has evaporated for strategic shipping routes. Government intervention is being discussed. Legislative frameworks are being debated that could restrict or require reporting of private silver holdings. When you combine these 3 signals, the institutions are reaching one unified conclusion. A major disruption is imminent, not just a market correction. A systemic breakdown where paper assets, stocks, bonds, even ETFs, could lose value rapidly while physical commodities become the only reliable store of wealth. The real strategy. These banks aren't buying silver because they think the price will go up 20% or 30%. They're buying silver because they believe that in the near future, physical silver will be one of the only assets that matters. And when repo markets seize up, banks need collateral they can actually trust. When supply chains break, whoever controls the physical inventory controls the market. When governments start regulating strategic assets, the metal you already own becomes far more valuable than the metal you wish you could buy later. This is defensive positioning for a world where the old rules don't apply anymore. The timeline. Based on the legislative discussion timelines and the deteriorating repo market conditions, institutional analysts believe the critical window is extremely narrow. If these trends continue accelerating, we could see significant policy announcements or market interventions within weeks, not months. That's why the accumulation is happening so fast. That's why they're not waiting. So now that you understand what they know, what can you actually do about it? You can't compete with billion-dollar institutions, but you can follow their strategy. Let me show you how. You don't have to fight the big players. You just have to move in the same direction they're moving. Strategy number 1, mirror their positioning. If major institutions are rotating from paper to physical, you should seriously consider the same move. Paper silver, ETFs, mining stocks, futures contracts can be manipulated, diluted, or frozen in a crisis. Physical silver stored securely can't be hacked, can't be diluted, and can't disappear with a keystroke. Strategy number 2, understand the broader pattern. Silver isn't the only strategic commodity showing these warning signs. Once you understand the pattern, repo stress, supply chain breakdown, regulatory discussion, you can apply it to other critical materials. Platinum, palladium, rare earth elements, uranium. The same institutions accumulating silver are likely positioning in these markets too. Diversify your hard asset exposure across the same commodities the smart money is targeting. Strategy number 3, act before the window closes. If legislative frameworks around strategic asset reporting do get implemented, acquiring significant positions could become much more complicated, more paperwork, more scrutiny, potentially higher transaction costs or taxes. The institutions are moving now precisely because they understand the regulatory landscape could shift rapidly. Your decision point. After everything I've shown you, the repo market stress, the insurance crisis, the legislative discussions, the institutional accumulation, I want to know where you stand. On a scale of 1 to 2, 1 to 10, how much do you trust the current financial system to protect your wealth? Drop your number in the comments below. And if you want to stay ahead of these institutional moves, subscribe to this channel. Because our next video will expose the 3 specific strategic metals these same institutions are preparing to accumulate after silver. You need to see those signals before they become obvious to everyone else. The smart money has already made its move. The only question is, will you follow the signal, or will you be the last one holding assets that evaporate when the system breaks? Don't wait for the headlines. By then, it's already too late. Position yourself now.